Okay, hello. Today is the 19th of June, 2022, and we'll talk about two architects born on the same day, but in different years. Although they both died at 71, and they both took part, were part of that group, the famous New York Five or the New York Whites. But let's start with Charles Gwathmey. Charles Gwathmey, who was born in 1938, as you can see. Okay, so Charles Gwathmey, born on June 19th, 1938, and died in August 2009, was an American architect. He was a principal at Gwathmey, Siegel and Associates Architects, as well as one of the 5 architects identified as the New York Five in 1969. Gwathmey was perhaps best known for the 1992 renovation of Frank Lloyd Wright's Guggenheim Museum in New York City. This is what it is written on Wikipedia. Born in Charlotte, North Carolina, he was the son of the American painter Robert Gwathmey and photographer Rosalie Gwathmey. He attended the High School of Music and Art in New York City, graduating in 1956. Charles Gwathmey attended the University of Pennsylvania and received his Master of Architecture degree in 1962 from Yale School of Architecture, where he won both the William Worth Winchester Fellowship as the outstanding graduate and a Fulbright grant. While at Yale, he studied under Paul Rudolph, a very important architect himself. Gwathmey served as president of the Board of Trustees for the Institute for Architecture and Urban Studies in New York, in Manhattan, the one that was founded by Peter Eisenman, and was elected a fellow of the American Institute of Architects in 1981. This was the man, very often smiling, but I have a picture with him not smiling in his later years. In 1965, while not yet a licensed architect, he designed a house and studio for his parents in Amagansett, New York, that became famous and revolutionized beach house design. When he did take the professional licensing exam, he was surprised to see a multiple choice question on the test that asked, which of these is the organic house? The choices included the house he designed for his parents. He wanted to answer that the organic house was his, but in order to pass the exam, he chose Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water house, which you know. He knew that was the answer they wanted. He passed. By 1977, Gwathmey had designed 21 houses and renovations while still under 40 years old and 10 years of practice. From 1965 through 1991, Gwathmey taught at Pratt Institute, Cooper Union for the Advancements of Science and Art, Princeton University, Columbia University, the University of Pennsylvania, the University of Texas, and the University of California at Los Angeles. He was Davenport Professor and Bishop Professor at Yale, and the Elliott Noyes Visiting Professor at Harvard. Gwathmey was the spring 2005 William A. Bernardi Resident in Architecture at the American Academy in Rome. Gwathmey's firm designed the Museum of Contemporary Art of North Miami, Florida in 1995, and the Astor Place Tower, a 21-story condominium project in Manhattan's East Village in 2005. In 2011, the Ron Brown Building would serve as the new home of the United States Mission to the United Nations, for which he was the lead architect. The building was dedicated to him. In her remarks, Ambassador Susan Rice thanked Gwathmey posthumously because he died in 2009. Now I reiterate, he is not one of my preferred architects, and maybe that's why this presentation is perhaps shorter than it should have been. I apologize for it, but it's an introduction to this architect and to his works. And you know, if you want to study further what he did, you can easily do on the web. His firm is still alive, so to speak, and you can find there a lot of materials. So this was the man, as I said, very often smiling, if not laughing. Here he is. You probably recognize the two gentlemen on the left. On the right, the taller one is the North American Charles Gwathmey, but on the left, Toyo Ito, and then in between Toyo Ito and Charles Gwathmey, Tadao Ando. So there, plenty of people there, you know, maybe an exhibition or something. You have to understand, you Romanian students, we have to create a similar atmosphere here in Bucharest and in Romania. We cannot continue with indifference. We cannot continue not to say something significant, you know, in a context beyond the frontiers of the country. I mean, when I look at this picture, I'm envious of these people. You know, they broke new ground. You know Tadao Ando, you know perhaps Toyo Ito. You don't yet know Charles Gwathmey, but again and again, it's about excellence in architecture. And you see that Tadao Ando and Toyo Ito are quite young in this picture. Now, of course, the cocky architect, you know, displaying his Mercedes. What can you do? Architects love, you know, flamboyant cars, and it's a trademark of architects almost, you know. It's a love story between architects and cars. Unfortunately, today we better think of trees than cars. But architects are slow in accepting this reality of our time. We need trees more than Mercedes. I'm absolutely sure of it. But at the time when he took this picture, I think was in the early 70s or so, I guess it was okay. Here he is with his later partner. He worked with various partners. This is Mr. Ziegel on the right and Charles Gwathmey on the left, still smiling. But he is not smiling here, although dressed well, and I think with the appropriate color coordination. Anyway, he died at 71. Some drawings, I couldn't find actually drawings of him, some axonometric drawings. I think I only have one drawing, this one that I found, yes, for a house that he built. And this drawing could have been his, but I don't think it is. But it shows his own house, or the house he designed for his parents, which is almost his first building, and in my opinion is the best. It became his own home and studio, perhaps after his parents died. And it's a good building. But before this building, he built, I just discovered just half an hour ago, he built another building which was destroyed in 1964, which I think was very good, and we are going to see it. So in 1964, the Gerald Miller residence on Fire Island, New York, sold around 1989 by an architect who worked for Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble is a store that sells books, to a neighbor who destroyed it for expansion of his adjacent house. Very sad. But, you know, human beings are very capable of destroying what is good. They did it very often. And even now, Mr. Putin is very busy destroying not just lots of human lives in Ukraine, but also important buildings and so on. Very sad. This is the building. This is the building that you know, unknowing neighbor of that architect who sold the house decided to destroy. And I truly think it's a nice house. And it's a nice house because it's unusual. You know, it almost has no windows, or very little there at the top, or very little that you see. Here is another picture. The resolution was not good, so I had to enlarge it. But I like this house, and I like this picture as well. I just don't believe it was destroyed. And I think I'm entitled to say that this building and the next one that you are going to see are, in my opinion, almost without question, his best works. By the way, where you see this website of houses is run and founded, and the creator of this website is a Romanian architect from Suceava. Unfortunately, I forgot his name. But where you see this sign, that's of houses, and it's actually written here. He has excellent taste, and I suggest to you, if you are interested in residential architecture, this is a beautiful website where you can find great old forgotten houses. But they are not old, nor really forgotten. But that's how the wording goes on this website. Anyway, this house does not exist any longer. Here you see the chair designed by Marcel Breuer for the Bauhaus. Well, at the Bauhaus, it is called now the Kandinsky chair or the Vasily chair. That's because the great painter Vasily Kandinsky asked Marcel Breuer he loved the chair, so he wanted to have one for himself. And Marcel Breuer did one at his home. Just like that, and later, some years later, it was called the Vasily chair. It's a famous chair for modernity, the Vasily chair or the Kandinsky chair. Okay, so now we go to this building, which in my opinion is together with the previous one. Maybe I hate hierarchies, yet these two buildings, the one you just saw and this one you are going to see, they are for me the most convincing. So this was built for his father, his family, his mother and his father, and I understood later became his own studio and home. It's a cube, it's a broken cube, but I think it's harmoniously eroded by windows and staircase and entrance door and the alcove of the loggia. All in all, I think it's a good building. But unfortunately, in my opinion, Charles Gwathmey didn't innovate a lot later on. He kind of remained stuck in this kind of architectural language. Louis Kahn was asked, I think in the 60s or early 70s, what he thought about the New York Five. Again, the New York Five being Michael Graves, Richard Meyer, Peter Eisenman, John Hejduk, and Charles Gwathmey, or Gwathmey-Siegel, because they worked together. And Louis Kahn apparently answered, he even called them Playboy architects, kind of maliciously. And he said, I prefer to do what is right in the wrong way than to do what is wrong in the right way. So I guess for Louis Kahn, the work of the New York Five were, the wrong things done in the right way. I don't know, but I understand in a way the point of Louis Kahn. There are actually two buildings. I don't know if he built them at the same time or not. You will see later on that John Hejduk kind of worked in the same way, although in his case, things are complicated because on one hand, he built less convincingly, and on the other hand, he has a much more complex realm of ideas related to architecture. This is a good building by any means. I don't think it can be criticized, with sufficiently good reasons. It's a good modernistic building, and yes, Richard Meyer also had buildings kind of similar at the beginning. Michael Graves as well. even Peter Eisenman at the very beginning, they were united by this kind of, modernism, not only with whiteness, but whiteness was preponderant. That's why they are called also not just the New York Five, but the New York Whites. Even here, you see, it's not just whiteness, but whiteness is important. Although, in contrast to that general whiteness, some yellow or some even black become even more, emphatic. And we look now at the plans of the house. Charles Gwathmey. This time he worked alone, building for his parents. It's interesting that actually the name of the house bears the name of his father, but it is said that usually great architects start by building for their mothers. Le Corbusier did it, Robert Venturi did it, Frank Lloyd Wright did it. So this is the house that Charles Gwathmey built in 1965 for his parents, and later on became his own house and studio. A model of it. There was a fresh modernity here at work, and a kind of an optimistic belief in modernity, which perhaps is less possible at our time. Now, the Strauss residence and purchase, New York, 1968. He worked with this person. He often worked after he became a licensed architect together with another architect, Richard Henderson. But you see, the architectural language is not very, very different. I mean, this one has some specificity because of the sloping parts of the roof, but otherwise you can recognize a Charles Gwathmey building kind of easily. Again, he is not one of my preferred architects, but I recognize certain qualities, and those qualities need to be acknowledged. Another residence from 1968, Joseph Sedaka. Beautiful landscape, beautiful trees. What can we say? But the building, in my opinion, is a little bit predictable now that we saw a few things by Charles Gwathmey, and he didn't really change. There is within the limits of his architectural choices, there is always, there are some variations, but not sufficiently surprising, in my opinion. He designed, we read, or built 21 private residences until he was 40, in less than 10 years of architectural practice, which is something. Obviously, he was appreciated for his ability to respond to this program. Now, you see, as opposed to Frank Lloyd Wright, And actually, we are going to see his intervention at the Guggenheim Museum. You remember what I read at the beginning, that you know, he wanted to choose as an example of organic architecture the house that he built for his parents, which he considered organic, and not the falling water, Casa de la Cascada by Frank Lloyd Wright. Well, in my opinion, his building, despite the fact that I like it, is not really organic architecture. I think in terms of organicity, the building by Frank Lloyd Wright is much more. But it shows again, you know, the belief he had in himself. On the other hand, this is what I wanted to say, actually. You see, the fireplace is at the edge of the building. It's in the corner and towards the outside, and the chimney is actually outside, as opposed to the buildings of Frank Lloyd Wright, where fire is always at the center. Not necessarily the geometrical center, but the, you know, the center doesn't have to be necessarily, you know, geometrically right in the physical measurable center of a being, like the heart. The heart of a human being is not in the center; it's a little bit on the left, and so, but still is not at the periphery. It's not at the, you know, at the very edge like it is here. This is something which Frank Lloyd Wright would have never done. Now, if you study the residences of Frank Lloyd Wright, you will see that the center, even if a little off often, but it's in good measure, is the element, the entity that structures the house, and the house develops around it. This is not the case here. Now, the East Campus, housing an academic center at Columbia University, is not a glorious building. 1977. To be honest with you, I'm a little bit bothered by this, you know, continuous employment of this kind of curved element, which in some cases, or many cases in his architecture, contains the stair. It's a block of flats, but, you know, done with a certain sensitivity, but nothing to write home about, as it is said, I think. And here, this elevation, I find it acceptable. And even here, I think the problems are here. It's a little bit, in my opinion, not very sensitively done. But this is my opinion, it's subjective. And I'm not even going to attempt to explain myself. I just made a statement. I should have explained myself, but I don't think I can. Now, renovation and addition for the Guggenheim Museum. He was congratulated for this work, but in my opinion, there weren't so many reasons to be congratulated for. Maybe the renovation was done well. There I cannot pronounce myself, but the addition, in my opinion, is less than skillful. And yes, the challenge was immense because he had to build right near the very, you know, noticed and noticeable and, you know, full of personality building by Frank Lloyd Wright, the Guggenheim Museum. I actually, you know, this is a picture taken of the Guggenheim Museum while the renovation was taking place. And I actually like it very much. I had the devilish thought that maybe it should have kept as it is, just like this, you know, to hide the building by Frank Lloyd Wright in this way. I like it. I find it very, you know, contemporary, so to speak. Unfortunately, I couldn't find great pictures or great resolution, but I like what I see, you know, a kind of a work in progress, exterior restoration in progress. And you see they created this mask you know, and behind it is the well-known building by Frank Lloyd Wright. And the addition by Gwathmey Siegel was not yet built. But I wanted to show you these pictures because, again, I like this very much. It should have been left like this from my point of view. I know it's a radical or even foolish point of view, but I'm you know, making this statement based on what I see and what I feel. But the way things became, here they are. This is the famous building by Frank Lloyd Wright, and this is the building by Gwathmey Siegel. Now you tell me which one is more organic. I mean, it makes me laugh. This man thought that the house he built for his parents, that was the organic house or the organic architecture, not Falling Water by Frank Lloyd Wright. These are, of course, other buildings, public buildings. But even if we compare these two, which one is organic? We certainly cannot say that this is the organic building and this is less organic. No way. But architects, have a big ego, and sometimes they say foolish things, like I just did, perhaps relating to, that image which I like very much of the work in progress. In my opinion, this doesn't show genius, this kind of building, and I really don't understand why he was so congratulated for it, because it's just a big box and rather unimaginatively done, really. I understand the context was very, very, very difficult, how to build just behind the Guggenheim Museum by Wright. This would not have been, and it was not, an easy task, that's for sure. But I don't think what he did or what they did is truly great. It was a kind of an easy way out. Still, the building that steals the show is Frank Lloyd Wright's building, of course. Here it is. I mean, this, it's less. That's the truth. It's less. It's more like a big storage space. It's a container that has no virtues really architectonically. While in the case of Frank Lloyd Wright, we talk about something else really, or even from the top. So this is Frank Lloyd Wright, and this is Charles Gwathmey, or Gwathmey and Siegel, his partner. Well, who is king here? I think I can say in a legitimate way, still Frank Lloyd Wright. Sorry, Mr. Gwathmey, I know it's your birthday today, and I regret, but I have to tell the truth as I see it. I mean, really, what's so great about this box? And to call it, I mean, he didn't call this organic, but he did say earlier that his house was the organic one and not the Falling Water by Frank Lloyd Wright. Anyway, Charles Gwathmey. Now, the Crocker Art Museum on Sacramento, this was finalized 1 year after he died, but the project was done while he was alive. And it's an architecture which is very similar to some buildings by Richard Meyer, for example. Yeah, I really wouldn't say that it has great virtues. Sorry about it. And it's not even very gracefully done. I mean, the play between openings like windows and doorways and the walls, the play between them doesn't have the harmony and the dynamic qualities of that house that he built for his family. Anyway, it's a building that, a larger building that he built in his later years. He built other buildings, but I got a little bit tired of his work. Sorry for being so frank, so sincere. But I still try to pay homage to this architect who is known and perhaps deserves more study, perhaps. And this is the last image of this short presentation on Charles Gwathmey. And now we'll go to John Hejduk, another architect who was part of the New York Five. So today we talk about two architects from that famous group, the New York Five or the New York Whites. John Hejduk is a more difficult architect, and I will try to explain why. So John Hejduk, John Quentin Hejduk, born again on the same day, the 19th of July, 1929, so a little bit older than Charles Gwathmey, and died in 2000. So he also died at 71, was an American architect, artist, and educator of Czech origin who spent much of his life in New York City, United States. Hejduk is noted for having had a profound interest in the fundamental issues of shape, organization, representation, and reciprocity. Well, this is the language of Wikipedia. We can talk about it later. Hejduk studied at the Cooper Union School of Art and Architecture, the University of Cincinnati, and the Harvard Graduate School of Design. He worked in several offices in New York, including that of I.M. Pei and Partners and the office of A.M. Kinney and Associates. He established his own practice in New York City in 1965, in the very same year when Charles Gwathmey built that house for his parents. Hejduk was professor of architecture at the Cooper Union for the advancement of science and art, School of Architecture from 1964 to 2000. So for 36 years, he was professor, and he was dean of that school from 1975 to 2000 for 25 years. That's not a little thing. His arrival, including the cooperation of many other influential professors, including Raymond Abraham, Ricardo Scofidio, Peter Eisenman, Charles Gwathmey, Diana Agreste, Diane Lewis, Elizabeth Diller, David Shapiro, Don Wall, and many others. By the way, Elizabeth Diller entered last year here on our Zoom platform from her car in New York City, and we had a chat for about 15 minutes. Perhaps her husband was driving and I didn't see the driver, but she talked to us for about 15 minutes or 20. It was on September 11, 2021. It was nice. It was a nice, surprise from her. I wish I had similar surprises from other people within the country, but I don't. So they transformed the practice and critical thought of architecture in ways that might be compared to Ludwig Mies van der Rohe's transformation of the Armour Institute into the Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. And here is John Hejduk, or here he was, a very big man, physically speaking. Here he is again. For a second, I had a feeling that this man was Putin. I can't take Putin out of my mind because of the tragedy in Ukraine. So this is John Hejduk, and I think he had a pair of shoes from Czechoslovakia, because I had a very similar, if not identical, pair that my parents bought me from a trip to Prague in Czechoslovakia, and with that pair of eccentric shoes, I spent my baccalaureate celebration or post-baccalaureate celebration. Anyway, a scene from Cooper Union with John Hejduk talking to the students there, and what can we say? A school that changed the world and maybe continues to change the world. A very, very remarkable school. Here is again inside the school, Cooper Union. And now I'll show some graphic works by him. You can find books by John Hejduk. Unfortunately, some of them became quite expensive. He made beautiful books, it's true. I think his books are more beautiful than the buildings he built. But he was probably a great educator, And by the way, Daniel Lipskind was one of his darlings, if not his darling. Anyway, you know, architecture is an art, even if, of course, it has also parts that relate to science. But at its core, in its heart, architecture is an art, and we should say it and we should acknowledge it. And, you know, what we look at here are graphic works, plans of possible houses or buildings that graphically, they show clearly that between art and architecture, the distance is not so long. This is a house he built in the Netherlands, the World House. I don't know. I mean, Kenneth Frampton has very legitimate concerns or criticism of this house. I don't know. Maybe I'm not now entitled to emit very technical, you know, assessments of the house. But aesthetically, if I look at it, it doesn't impress me. You know, it's a house. It's a house among many other houses. Of course, we cannot talk about sustainability here. I mean, look at these parts of the building, you know, they are floating above each other, but with a spacing underneath. I mean, you know, there are significant losses of energy here. But it's not just about that. Even it's something that I don't find very convincing. I understand, you know, he wanted to be playful, but I think I think there is a difference between innocent playing and forced playing, or I have a feeling that that playing in that superior sense of you know, playing innocently was not his main you know, concern or attribute. But my assessment or my opinions are based, of course, on subjective reactions to his work. Like this window here, okay, you know, it can be this way or it could be another way. It's true that I often advocate capriciousness and playfulness. I do, but I don't know why I'm not very sensitive to, or I'm not very positively responding to this kind of playfulness. I find it rather shallow, graphical. And look at this wall here. I mean, this wall is almost sadistic here. You know, it's interrupting brutally, you know, the access from here to here. And yes, I'm sure there are openings into it, but from the outside, this wall reads like a, you know, almost like a, you know, frontier wall, like a, you know, the Chinese wall, or the wall that you know, Mr. Trump wanted to build between the United States and Mexico. This is the old building of the Cooper Union. Across the street, and I don't know if I have pictures here, I wish I do, Tom Main built a new building. So this is the old building of Cooper Union, the school that John Hejduk was dean in for 25 years and professor. I don't know why I showed this building here, but anyway, I do back to the house he built in the Netherlands. Perhaps you already realized to an extent why John Hejduk and Charles Gwathmey were part of the same group, because their architecture is not, you know, in depth very different. But his graphic work and his realm of ideas distinguishes him from all the other four and from Charles Gwathmey, and we are going to see why. Again, for more pertinent comments on this building, I suggest to you to find what Kenneth Frampton wrote about it. You see the brutality of this wall. It's clear even in this picture. You know, I find it contrived. I find it almost vicious. Yeah, I'm glad I have this text by Kenneth Frampton, the one I mentioned. So let's actually read it, because he compares this building to this famous building by Le Corbusier. A starting point for discussing the deflection of the vocabulary of Le Corbusier towards Hejduk's own design intentions can perhaps be provided by the idea of promenade, which was important to Le Corbusier. According to Le Corbusier, movement provides continuously changing visual fields within an architectural visual horizon that is constant over at least part of the trajectory. Thus, verity is set within one or more clearly perceived organizing frameworks. In the wall house, the one that we just saw, movement is associated with a visual field that changes only minimally within a given horizon, as in the approach corridor, or with abrupt changes of the horizon of reference, as when the wall is crossed. The interplay between the changing shapes of visual fields according to incremental changes of local position and a relatively constant horizon is negated. One might argue that the landscape outside the house is the horizon of reference from the three living spaces. However, even this horizon is dissociated from the spaces that channel movement. The wall house can indeed be read as a handling of movement that is equivalent to an anti-promenade. If Le Corbusier's design invites us to understand how control changes of views are produced as local variations of an underlying structure, John Hejduk provides an aggregation of segmented views that instead defy synthesis. To achieve the quality of a promenade, Le Corbusier fundamentally works with three-dimensional space. Kenneth Frampton says that Hejduk specializes in frontality. So let's read this again. Kenneth Frampton says that Hejduk specializes in frontality. Now, modern architecture was and still is concerned with space, with three dimensions. So frontality is not truly of the highest concern for modernity. Maybe in this, John Hejduk shows a certain kind of anti-modernism because of, but I think actually what Kenneth Frampton wants to say is that the work of John Hejduk has a two-dimensional quality, or has two-dimensional qualities and not three-dimensional ones. And this is problematic because you cannot transform a building into a sum of bidimensionalities or frontalities, to use another word. And I think exactly because of it, John Hejduk is rather some kind of a graphic architect and not a true architect in the sense that we understand architecture in modernity, and perhaps not only in modernity. Here we see the plan of the house, and we see the brutality in a way of that wall, separating wall that we looked at. We see other curious things here, like, for example, look at this bathroom, something that would have been totally inconceivable in the educational system that we have here, to have a bathroom with 4 exterior walls and totally exposed to everything around it, but this was done by other architects, and it's not a crime in my opinion. Here you see the promenade that Kenneth Frampton commented upon, that it actually doesn't have those qualities that the promenade in the work of Le Corbusier does. Anyway, the wall house. I guess it was some kind of a course on this house in Catalonia, in Barcelona. Here are, studies and 3D modelings and digital modelings of this house. This is something else, a study for a church. This is the house, again, in the Netherlands by him, John Hejduk. The other the other member of the New York Five. The other four being, as I said, Richard Meyer, Michael Graves, Peter Eisenman, and Charles Gwathmey. Now, the Jan Palach Memorial, well, here it says opens in Prague. This was a memorial that he envisioned and built in Prague because he had the Czech ancestry, to commemorate this student who, immolated himself to protest the Russian invasion. And he built two houses, so-called houses, the house of the suicide, and I always forget which one I think this one is, and the house of the mother of the suicide. So, this is a speculative architecture, a metaphorical architecture that tries to, externalize psychological states relating to this terrible tragedy. So let's read here. It's a text by David Shapiro, a poet who taught at the Cooper Union, theoretical and sculptural works, House of Suicide and House of Mother of Suicide, the funeral of Jan Palach. When I entered the first meditation, I escaped the gravity of the object. I experienced the emptiness, and I have been dead a long time. When I had a voice you could call a voice, my mother wept to me, my son, my beloved son, I never thought this possible. I'll follow you on foot. Halfway in mud and slush, the microphones picked up. It was raining on the houses. It was snowing on the police cars. The astronauts were weeping, going neither up nor out. And my own mother was brave enough. She looked and it was all right. I was dead. House of the Suicide and House of the Mother of the Suicide were inspired by a David Shapiro poem about Jan Palach, the Czech student who set himself on fire in January 1969 to protest the Soviet occupation of Czechoslovakia. Each house is a metal-clad cubic box of roughly 12 feet, topped by 49 uniformly spaced metal shards of roughly the same height as the box bases. In the House of the Suicide, the shards are slightly splayed apart. In the House of the Mother of the Suicide, they huddle together, rising vertically from the cubic box. Yeah, I was right. Out of the two houses, the House of the Mother of the Suicide was on the left and the House of the Suicide on the right. The monotone gray of the sealed House of the Suicide is punctuated only by a closed slit painted red. The black house of the Mother of the Suicide can be entered. Inside one mounts a small platform, a cross between a gallows and the widow's walk, from which one can look out at the House of the Suicide through a small slit in the elevation, painted blue on the exterior. In 1991, Czech President Václav Havel invited Hejduk, who was of Czech descent, to install the two houses temporarily at the Prague castle. With a history unlike any other, World House 2 redefines the, no, sorry about this. So these are the two houses. This is the House of the Suicide, and this is the House of the Mother of the Suicide. And yes, the relationship between mother and son, we all know, is very strong. And in this tragic case, even stronger. This is a metaphorical architecture. It's an unusual architecture for the functionalist. It's a poetical architecture. It's a metaphorical architecture. Look at this, it almost shows despair. It's an abstraction a graphic and architectonic abstraction of despair. Yes, one arrives at suicide at the peak of despair. So again, the house of the mother of the suicide and the house of the suicide, they are similar, of course, and they are abstractions. They are installations, actually. They are closer to sculpture and installation than to architecture per se. But this is John Hejduk. In a certain way, he's more interesting than Charles Gwathmey. The realm of ideas in the work of Charles Gwathmey is not very high. But architectonically speaking, we can debate if indeed Hejduk is so convincing. But as I said, I've heard important people at the end of the 20th century saying that John Hejduk is extremely important. And some even thought he was the most important architect in the world at the end of the millennium, at the end of the 20th century. Now, this is a building, socio-cultural center. I don't know. I mean, it's another building, but I find these balconies and, what are these skylights or, some kind of louvers, quite aggressive, piercing the body of the building. There is a level of aggressivity. His drawings, though, are very, very well done, and his sketches, and he combines many elements. We are going to see more things, more drawings. He did some remarkable books, very beautiful books, and about architecture. But the built work, in my opinion, is not really the highest. This is a building he built in Berlin. This presentation, I probably have another presentation. I hope I do. This one deserves some improvement because it's not as well organized as it should have been. These are buildings that he built in Berlin in 1987, I think, in the 80s, when Berlin invited various important architects from all over the world to build, apartment buildings in general, apartment buildings. And that's what he built. This is by John Hejduk. Also, this one is, they were almost demolished, but the community, international community of architects protested. They're curious buildings. I mean, you look at this elevation, and he does here something that any functionalist school of architecture would protest against. Immediately the criticism would be that snow would accumulate here, and rain and so on. And you look at this elevation, it's like a face. Now you have the eyes and the nose and the mouth, and it's creating this discomforting cut in the center, or it's usually the roof should have been the other way, but he did it in this way to create even anxiety. I imagine he knew something about angst. And this facade in Berlin, well, it's both humorous and I don't know, it's like a mask also. There are even cartoons with this face, like someone saw the head of a cat here. And anyway, so both the tower, and actually there are two buildings, is this one and a symmetrical one on the left side, they're all done by John Hejduk. And as I said, they were, at one point they were almost demolished, but I think the community of architects, and maybe not only architects, won in the end, so they were saved. They have some interesting elements, but I think what Kenneth Frampton mentioned and commented upon is very valid when he called John Hejduk an architect of frontality, because here we also see a concern with frontality. This is a wall, the frontality of which was addressed in a certain way. This is another wall whose frontality was addressed in another way. So there is a bidimensionality in the work of John Hejduk, which could make his architecture be considered closer to stage design than to architecture. But he still has interesting elements, and you might not like what you look at, but it is rather unique and unusual. Although done with, in a way, a simple means. We are going to see another house that he built in Berlin, the house for two brothers. That one also rather strange. I mentioned, that facade, and a certain resemblance with a cat. Well, here it is. Someone, I didn't do this, someone, saw the head of a cat on the short elevation of that building. Anyway, moving forward. House for two brothers, because I just mentioned it. It's part of this Stagel housing in Berlin, built also in the 80s, I think 1987 or so, when Berlin again had a brilliant idea to invite very good, very important architects in the world to build buildings as part of another cluster of buildings built by famous architects. They did the same in 1950s and in 1930s. So 3 times during the 20th century, Berlin understood that if they invited important architects to build blocks of flats and some houses, the city can only gain, and it did. Le Corbusier built Unité d'Habitation in the 1950s. Oscar Niemeyer was there, even Alvarado, Baquema, and then in the 30s, other famous architects. So Gropius also built in 1950s. And now we look at the building built by John Hejduk, and he called this a house for two brothers. Indeed, we see 2 buildings. Now, I guess one is for one brother, the other one for the other brother. You see the aggressive skylights here, but the plan of the house is maddening. I don't think there is another house in the world with a similar area with so many doors. It's some kind of a mad labyrinth there, and we are going to see the plan. I hope I have it here. I didn't look at this presentation, which I made it 2 years ago or so. I didn't look since then, but I should have it. Oh no, please don't tell me I don't have it. No, I don't have it here. No, I just don't believe it. It means I have another presentation on John Hejduk. But if you are interested, please search on the web a house for two brothers, John Hejduk, plan, and you are going to see it on Google Images. The Kreuzberg Tower we already saw. This is just a detail, another detail. You remember, the cat house here on the left, and the tower on the right. Nice photographs, but the photographs are done by a photographer, not by an architect, or not by the architect. This is, you see, he was preoccupied by two-ness. We had a house for 2 brothers. Here we have 2 towers which were built after he died near Santiago da Compostela building built by his friend Peter Eisenman, I guess as an homage to John Hejduk. And this is an interesting work. It's in Spain. It is interesting because you have 2 identical volumes, but treated in terms of materials very differently. So you have similarity, but you also have a significant difference. I hope I have other pictures with this work by John Hejduk. You see, even if you have exactly the same volume, but you have very different materials, you can get, different results. So, they are identical as volumes, but because of the treatment of the elevations and of the materials used, it's a betrayed symmetry. It's an interesting work. And again, it was built after he died in Santiago de Compostela in Spain. I don't know exactly what the function of these two towers is. Perhaps, some kind of a part of the museum, because it's close to the building by Peter Eisenman, which is dedicated to culture. John Hejduk in Spain. The city of culture that Peter Eisenman built. Very nice picture, isn't it? These two towers seen in this light makes me think of the the towers of the Chartres Cathedral, where one tower, the older one, is dedicated to the moon, and the newer tower was dedicated to the sun. So you have the sun and the moon, two towers. Here, I don't know if the symbolism could be read in the same way, but it made me think of that very, very, very beautiful cathedral in France, Chartres Cathedral, which has the towers, of course, on the western facade. One, the sun tower, and the other one, the moon tower. Or we can also use a different symbolism here, the masculine principle and the feminine principle. The feminine being connected with the moon, and the masculine being connected with the sun. And maybe even here you could say the opaque tower represents man, or the masculine principle, and the transparent, the open, the fragile tower, the one made of glass, represents the feminine. It's possible. Or we can talk with another pair of opposites, fire and water. Anyway, this is a speculative architecture. It's open to interpretation. You see, there is who knows? I don't know exactly what this stood for. Is an installation within the glass tower by John Hejduk. This reminds me of the Holocaust installation in Budapest, which was also with shoes at the edge of the water, at the edge of Danube. Santiago de Compostela, John Hejduk. And here we see there are concerts taking place, but the concert is actually taking place on the building built by Peter Eisenman, the city of culture, and in the background are the two towers by John Hejduk. It's an interesting architecture, actually. I like it, mysterious as it is, maybe even useless. They build this, they are like two mosques in a way, but architecturally, even if they have a mysterious function, if at all, I think they are enticing. Here we see in the foreground a building by Peter Eisenman, the City of Culture in Santiago de Compostela. So this is what he wrote, John Hejduk. What is decisive about his work now? I guess it wasn't him who wrote, but then I don't understand. Somebody wrote this. What is decisive about his work is that it leads to a different place on which is both alien and inalienable. A place which consecrates architecture with mysteries that are no longer decipherable within the ordinary code of mimesis. This is an installation, I don't know where he did it, in Norway or in South America. But you see, this is not really architecture. I mean, it is in a way, but in another way, it is not. It's more, it's closer to stage design. But he is more complex than Charles Gwathmey. You know, Charles Gwathmey did just buildings, some better, some less. While John Hejduk is more complicated. You know, he's exploring various ways of building, and where theater is often invoked, and you know, even you know, complicated scenarios. His drawings convey a quest for some kind of a modern medievalization, if I can call it so. It is a little bit simplistic somehow in terms of the specificities of architecture, but he can still be very fruitful, because he attempts to break new ground in an unusual and I mean, in unexpected ways. I'm not sure I find now the best wording, but hopefully I will be able to elaborate a little further later on. Here they are: Peter Eisenman, Richard Meyer, Michael Graves, and Charles Gwathmey. Maybe the picture was taken by John Hejduk. I'm not sure. So here we have 4 of the 5 New York Fives. The cover of a book by John Hejduk, Mask of Medusa. Look at his sketches. This presentation doesn't make me very happy. I apologize, but hopefully we'll see more interesting things. Other installations by him. Again, he tried to connect architecture with other fields, with other realms of investigation, with other you know, intellectual pursuits. So maybe inevitably, from the intrinsic point of view of architecture, maybe what he did is not sufficiently strong or legitimate. The Mask of Medusa, Buenos Aires, 1998. He died in 2000, so this was 2 years before he died in Buenos Aires. Again, an installation, really, some kind of a stage design. This is a book which I actually have, and it's a beautiful book, Education of an Architect, which was part, it's about with the works of students at Cooper Union, the school that he led for 25 years, and he was a professor for a much longer time, actually. It's a fine book, and you know, look here, the Erwin Channing School of Architecture of the Cooper Union. The dean was at that time John Hejduk. Cemetery for the Ashes of Thought. I think he was preoccupied with death because many of his sketches refer to this, you know, and look here, you know, talking about, I mentioned a certain aggressivity, or, you know, you remember the brutality. I thought that wall that, you know, almost unjustifiably cut one part of the house from the rest of the house. Here we see the aggressivity of 2 entities, you know. These two, there are sadistic overtones there, I would say. This is the cover of a book that I actually have by him. Here you have again a picture of the, well, there are 6, but they are supposed to be the New York 5. Eisenman is here, John Hejduk here, Richard Meyer, Michael Graves, Charles Gwathmey, and this was Siegel. He's the partner of Charles Gwathmey. Anyway, that wasn't necessary to, you know, agitate my sight with that small picture. Here you see them better. So again, John Hejduk and Charles Gwathmey, We talked about both today, and with some other occasion, we'll talk about Eisenman and Richard Meyer and Michael Graves. He died, he died, he died. I don't know about Siegel. Richard Meyer is still kicking, so to speak, and disturbing young women in his office. And Peter Eisenman this year in August will be 90 years old. John Hejduk, Dean of this School of Architecture for 25 years. These are pages from his books, from some of his books. He published several beautiful books, actually, where he connects architecture with poetry, with philosophy, with literature. He's provocative, and I think we need people like him to unsettle our presumptions that we know what architecture is. In a certain way, all his work is about what is architecture. That is about the question, what is architecture? Look at these drawings. He loved, of course, Japanese woodcuts, and it shows. And we try to inspire by the Japanese woodcuts to envision possible, hybrid, let's call them hybrid buildings. A machinery, some kind of an installation they built, I guess, at Cooper Union, a very unusual school. So this is the dean with a scarf, which can only belong to a dean. And as he was a big man, he was probably, impressive. I actually attended a lecture by him at Columbia University in New York, and I even wrote an essay then called "Apropos of John Hejduk's Lecture." Behind, you see an enlargement of one of his sketches, another, drawing for a possible building. Again and again, I say the same thing to students. Even if you don't have commissions, you don't have clients, no one can stop you from envisioning architecture and architectures if you love architecture. Draw, like, this is a drawing. I think it's a very fine drawing. It's it's a drawing that entices one. You explore through drawings. You can explore through modeling. You can do it digitally as well. He only worked manually, but the idea is not to give up on architecture and to externalize everything that is within you that loves architecture. Externalize that something. Don't let it die, or don't let it unexpressed. Express it. Yeah, this is a drawing of that wall house that he built in the Netherlands. Sketches, but they aren't only sketches. You'll see also other things by him. This is another book, and I think I have it. Unfortunately, these books became very expensive lately. When I bought it, was not expensive, but now it's several hundreds dollars. Soundings, work by John Hejduk. And yeah, you might say, what is this nonsense? Well, sometimes what we call nonsense could be very, very fruitful ground on which to build something, something new, something to, it's important to explore as openly and as, adventurously as possible what architecture is or could be. Like you could say, what does architecture have to do with this? Well, it's like asking, what does architecture have to do with life or with death? Well, here we see an angel, we see sensuality, we see death, we see an animal. He was a poet. Maybe as an architect, he didn't achieve the greatness of other architects, but he was a poet who explored architecture in unusual ways. And Cathedral, 1996, 4 years before he died. It's a model for a possible cathedral. I wish those people who still build now the cathedral in Bucharest would see it. I'm not saying that this is necessarily a great building. No, I'm not saying that, but it is exploring something else, something which could become under, certain conditions, hopefully a good building. He was exploring maybe the very existence of God. Maybe he had some doubts. Maybe he wanted badly to believe and couldn't. I don't know. I didn't know. Although I did talk with him once on the phone, and we did talk once when I gave him an essay of mine after a conference at Cooper Union. Anyway, this is another book. I have this book too, Adjusting Foundations. And you see clearly the influence of the Japanese woodcuts. And indeed, the Japanese woodcuts are beautiful. And many architects love them. Or I don't know if many, but I do know that Frank Lloyd Wright loved the Japanese woodcuts. Well, loved Japan, period. But loved the Japanese woodcuts and had a great collection of Japanese woodcuts. You see here, references to various things, André Gide and Marcel Proust. By the way of Marcel Proust, the great French writer, this year there will be 100 years since he died. And I want to launch a competition for the House of Time, because he was obsessed by time. And he wrote that very important literary work called À la recherche du temps perdu, in search of the lost time. So, figures, creatures, characters. One day with John Hejduk. What was this? Perhaps some kind of a symposium or something when he was still alive. Drawings by him. Again, Daniel Lipskin was his darling. Vladivostok, another book by him. We see the sketches of the two towers built in Santiago da Compostela. Again and again, what John Hejduk is showing is that if you are an architect, you can explore architecture in many, many ways. If you find joy in thinking and feeling about architecture, express those feelings and those thoughts. Express them in whatever form. The freer, the better. The wilder, the better. Don't be afraid of so-called making mistakes. If you don't make mistakes, you don't live, actually. So you see here the Diamond House. We saw a similar drawing at the beginning, that a new town for a new Orthodox. I don't know what that new Orthodox might be. A Berlin Mosque. All kinds of drawings. Of course, he loved to draw, but it's more than just drawing. I mean, it is drawing, but it's also, an existential field here that he's exploring. Philosophy is part of what animates these drawings. This is similar to, or maybe it was a preliminary work to the House of the Suicide and the House of the Mother of the Suicide, the Angel Catcher. I don't know exactly what this is. The Angel Catcher, strange wording also, Angel Catcher, as if angels can be or should be catched or caught. John Hejduk, Surrealism, architecture, the architectural uncanny, Berlin Mosque, architecture and urbanism. Surrealism is very, very important, could be very fruitful for Romanians as well, because Romania did have great surrealists, both in plastic arts and literature, both within the country and who left the country to Paris or who knows where. Explore surrealism, because there is a door towards increased freedom and intensified imagination. The books by him are nice, are really nice. That this tension, continuous tension between the words and the images, and between, all kinds of, it's the theater of life, yes. But the theater of life is part of life, and we should acknowledge it. I always like this drawing. I don't know what he did it for. Is it for Berlin? I don't know. But look at this site plan. Sorry, look at this. These are existing buildings. I am not looking at them, but I look at what he proposed here. Try to imagine this as a, as a fragment of urbanism, or as a site plan for various buildings. I find them all very enticing, very provocative, very interesting. What site plan in the world looks like this? I know of none. But imagine now from this site plan building, building individual buildings based on this scheme. Could be very, very interesting, I think. John Hejduk, architect. And what is here? He had all kinds of ideas. He tried to structure, to bring together various forms of, like here, look, horticulturalist. And it's very interesting. He begins with it. And I think he had a great intuition, because I think today we need more horticulturists and gardeners than architects. Why? Because we need more nature than buildings. That's why. And there are actually schools of architecture which have horticulture being taught there, like the Cincinnati School of Architecture, which has a faculty or a department of horticulture, although it's School of Architecture. But let's continue to read. Rose woman, metal man, park attendant, inhabitants, drawbridge man, trolley man, mechanic, operator, children with various, I don't know what those initials mean, physician, nurse, optometrist, painter, musician, poet, soloist, musicians, dancer, librarian, typesetter, poem, mask repairman, watch repairman, paper restorer, carpenter. And the list goes on. Plumber, shoe repairman, clothesman, crochet lady, shade woman, security, researcher, identity card man, stamp man, accountant, keeper of the records, giver of the keys. We talk about function, but we reduce the functions of life so violently that we actually impoverished architecture terribly. What about this function, the keeper of the keys, or the giver of the keys, or the keeper of the records? Are we thinking at all about such things? Those who employ certain spaces that we do, look, timekeeper, the dead. Are we thinking of the dead? I don't think so. The exiles, are we thinking of the exiles? Are we thinking of the disappeared? We are not. Room of the innocent. Who is thinking of the room of the innocent? I don't think too many, if any. Room for those who looked the other way. Now try to make a building where you provide a room for those who looked the other way. Because it's exactly those that we forget, those who look the other way. Make a room for those who look the other way. Maybe you yourself is one of those who look the other way. Maybe, and hopefully. Anyway, drawings, the love of drawing, models. He loved architecture, obviously. This is that site plan, which I like very much. And I don't know what it is. Yes, there is surrealism here. There is the unexpected here, the unknown here. I love it. Object subject drawing from the sketchbook Riga project. We already saw this. I find it rather aggressive, but Giacometti has something similar too. The building in Berlin, a he and a she, and a sleeping animal there. Drawings, installations, the buildings in Berlin. I don't know what this is. I mean, I know what it is, but what is the relationship to architecture? I don't know. Oslo. In Oslo, he built this. He was very well known and very well respected as an educator, as an innovator, as a creator of new possibilities, and he was, a catalyst And I think we need catalysts. Escape from what? From death. What else? I mean, you see the hourglass here. Well, the hourglass is a symbol of the passage of time, of the passing time and death. It's a meditation on death. That's what it is. Sanctuaries. I have this little book too, with a forward by Michael Hayes, who is probably still leading the the theory department at Harvard Graduate School of Design. The cathedral. In a way, he remained a student all his life, although he was the dean of the very school, where he was perhaps a student all his life. But I think these are the best deans, who are themselves students all their lives, asking questions, being, tormented by not finding the answer to the question, what is architecture? Anyway, look at the price of this little book. I probably bought it to $10 and now it's $752. Can you believe it? It's truly a small book in terms of its dimensions. On Amazon, never buy from Amazon. They sell very expensively, and in this case, ridiculously and tragically so. Other drawings by John Hejduk. Now again, the architect might say, leave me alone with these drawings. They have nothing to do with architecture. I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't say so. Well, they have to do with life and with faith even, and with a preoccupation with the hourglass of existence, life, death, birth, the exile, the disappearance, the keeper of the records, the giver of the keys, or the other way around, whatever. I love this because I love Japanese woodcuts. This one we saw and I like it too. What is this? Sacred support, tangent, point, touch. Well, maybe cryptical or maybe not so cryptical. And I think this is the last of this last slide, the last image of this imperfect and insufficient and still desiring presentation. Let's wish happy birthday to John Hejduk, and let's uncube everybody, please. Let's uncube all of us. Thank you.